There is a silent war within you, not a war of enemies outside, but a war between what you feel and what you must become. Emotion is ancient. It is instinct. It is the whisper of your shadow pulling you toward comfort, toward escape, toward the familiar change you mistake for safety. Discipline, however, discipline is conscious. It is forged. It is chosen. And most people never choose it. They kneel before their emotions. They say, "I don't feel like it today." They say, "I'm not motivated." They say, "Tomorrow I will begin." But tomorrow is the favorite illusion of the weak. You must understand this. Emotion is fleeting, unstable, and often deceptive. Discipline is stable. It is the bridge between who you are and who you could become. To live only by emotion is to remain a child. To live by discipline is to begin the journey toward individuation, the process of becoming whole. So today, you must decide. Will you be ruled or will you rule? There is a dangerous illusion quietly within the human mind, the illusion that what you feel must be true. It whispers to you in moments of weakness, in moments of desire, in moments of fear, and it convinces you that your inner state is a reliable reflection of reality. But it is not. It has never been. Emotion is ancient. It comes from a time before language, before reason, before the structured mind you now call yourself. It is primal, instinctive, and deeply rooted in survival, not in truth. And because of this, it does not seek accuracy. It seeks comfort, safety, and immediate relief. When you feel afraid, your mind tells you there is danger even when there is none. When you feel unmotivated, your mind tells you that action is meaningless even when action is the very thing that would liberate you. When you feel insecure, your mind tells you that you are incapable even when your potential remains untouched, waiting beneath layers of doubt. Do you see the pattern? Emotion does not reveal truth. It interprets reality through the lens of your past wounds, your hidden fears, your unexamined beliefs. It is less like a mirror and more like a distorted glass. And yet most people live their entire lives as servants to this distortion. They wake up and consult their feelings as if they were a compass. Do I feel like working today? Do I feel confident? Do I feel ready? And if the answer is no, they retreat, they delay, they escape. But what they do not realize is that by obeying emotion, they are reinforcing it. Every time you act based on fear, fear grows stronger. Every time you avoid discomfort, your tolerance for discomfort shrinks. Every time you choose ease over effort, you train your mind to reject growth. This is how a person becomes trapped not by external chains, but by internal patterns. Carl Jung understood something profound. Within every individual exists a shadow. This shadow contains everything you avoid, everything you suppress, everything you refuse to confront. And emotion is often the voice of that shadow, not because it wants to guide you toward truth, but because it wants to keep you where you are. Safe, predictable, unchanged. The shadow does not care about your potential. It cares about your survival as you currently are. So when you feel resistance, when you feel that inner voice telling you to stop, to quit, to wait, to hide, you must ask yourself a dangerous question. Is this truth, or is this my shadow protecting its territory? Because the two can feel identical. The man who never starts tells himself he is not ready. The woman who never speaks tells herself she is not confident. The dreamer who never acts tells himself he is waiting for the right moment. But these are not truths. They are emotional interpretations masquerading as facts. Truth is objective. Truth is often uncomfortable. Truth does not change based on your mood. You may feel incapable, but the truth is, you have not yet tried enough. You may feel unworthy, but the truth is, worth is built through action. You may feel lost, but the truth is, clarity comes from movement, not stillness. Emotion says, stay where it is safe. Truth says, move and discover. And here lies the great conflict of the human psyche, the battle between perception and reality. To grow, you must learn to separate the two. This does not mean you must destroy emotion. That is impossible and undesirable. Emotion is a signal. It has value. It tells you where your fears lie, where your wounds are hidden, where your attention is needed. But it is not a ruler. It is not a master. It is not a command. It is information, nothing more. The disciplined individual understands this distinction. He feels fear and acts anyway. He feels doubt and continues anyway. He feels resistance and moves through it. Not because he is fearless, but because he no longer confuses feeling with fact. This is a higher level of consciousness. This is the beginning of mastery. Once you stop obeying every emotion, something remarkable happens. You begin to see yourself clearly. You begin to notice patterns. You begin to recognize that the same feelings arise in the same situations, not because those situations are objectively threatening, but because your mind has been conditioned to respond in a certain way. And if something is conditioned, it can be changed, but only through awareness and disciplined action. You must become an observer of your own mind. When emotion arises, do not immediately act. Pause, watch, question it, ask yourself, what is this feeling trying to make me do? Is this aligned with who I want to become? Is this a reaction or a conscious choice? In that moment of pause, you create space between stimulus and response, and in that space, you find power. Because now, you are no longer reacting, you are choosing, and choice is the foundation of transformation. Understand this deeply. Your future will not be determined by how you feel. It will be determined by how you act despite how you feel. The person who succeeds is not the one who feels motivated every day. That person does not exist. The one who succeeds is the one who acts when motivation is absent, when emotion is chaotic, when the mind resists. Because they have understood a truth that most people never grasp. Emotion is temporary. Action is defining. Your feelings will change hour by hour, day by day, but your actions accumulate. They build identity. They shape reality. If you allow temporary emotions to dictate permanent decisions, you will build a life of inconsistency, regret, and unrealized potential. But if you allow conscious action to override temporary emotion, you will build something far greater, a self that is stable, resilient, and aligned with purpose. This is not easy. In fact, it is one of the hardest things a human being can do, to act against the pull of their own emotions. It feels unnatural at first. It feels like resisting. It feels like friction, but that friction is the point. Because within that friction, something new is being formed, a stronger will, a clearer mind, a more integrated self. You are, in those moments, stepping beyond the unconscious and into awareness. You are no longer being driven, you are driving. And this is the essence of individuation. To become whole is not to eliminate emotion, but to place it in its proper role, to acknowledge it but not obey it blindly, to listen but not surrender. It is to stand at the center of your own psyche and say, I feel this, but I am not controlled by this. That is power. That is freedom. Because the truth is, if you live by emotion, you will always be at the mercy of circumstances. Good days will lift you. Bad days will destroy you. You will be inconsistent, unstable, reactive. But if you live by conscious discipline, guided by values rather than feelings, you become something else entirely. You become reliable. You become focused. As said, you become dangerous in the most constructive sense of the word, because now, nothing external can easily shake you, not discomfort, not fear, not doubt. You have learned to act in spite of them, and once you reach that level, something shifts inside you. You no longer ask, how do I feel about this? You ask, what must be done? And then, you do it, regardless. This is the path very few choose, because it requires honesty, it requires responsibility, it requires you to confront the parts of yourself that would rather remain hidden, but it is also the only path that leads to true growth, because truth does not lie in how you feel. Truth lies in what remains when emotion fades, and what remains is what you have built. So the next time your emotions rise, whether it is fear, doubt, laziness, or hesitation, do not treat them as commands. Treat them as signals. Observe them, understand them, but do not kneel before them. Stand firm, act anyway, and in doing so, you will slowly, steadily transform from someone who is ruled by their inner world into someone who shapes it. That is the difference between those who remain as they are and those who become who they were meant to be. There is a fundamental misunderstanding that keeps most people imprisoned within themselves, the belief that discipline is a form of restriction, a harsh imposition, a denial of freedom. They see it as something external, something forced, something that takes away joy and replaces it with rigidity. And so they resist it, they avoid it, they postpone it. But what they fail to realize is that discipline in its truest form is not oppression. It is liberation. It is the quiet, deliberate act of taking ownership over the chaos within you. It is the decision to no longer be governed by impulse, by distraction, by the endless fluctuations of mood and desire. It is the process through which you reclaim authority over your own mind. To understand this, you must first confront a difficult truth. Without discipline, you are not free. You are reactive. You are driven by whatever feeling arises in the moment: hunger, boredom, fear, excitement, laziness. You move not by conscious direction but by unconscious pull. And though it may feel like freedom, it is, in reality, a subtle form of slavery. Because if your actions are dictated by impulse, then you are not choosing your life. Your impulses are. Self-mastery begins at the moment you recognize this. It begins when you step back from your own behavior and observe it not as something inevitable, but as something conditioned. You begin to notice patterns: how you delay when things become difficult, how you seek comfort when discomfort appears, how you abandon effort when immediate results are not visible. These patterns are not who you are, they are what you have practiced, and anything practiced can be unlearned. But unlearning requires confrontation. It requires you to face the part of yourself that resists structure, that avoids responsibility, that prefers the familiar pain of stagnation over the uncertain discomfort of growth. This part is subtle. It does not announce itself as weakness, it disguises itself as logic. I'll start tomorrow. I'm just not in the right mindset. I need to wait until I feel ready. These are not rational thoughts. They are protective mechanisms. They are the voice of a psyche that has grown accustomed to comfort and now fears disruption. Discipline is the force that disrupts it. When you choose discipline, you are not simply choosing to wake up early, or to work harder, or to follow a routine. You are choosing to override deeply ingrained patterns. You are choosing to act in alignment with who you wish to become, rather than who you have been conditioned to be. This is why discipline feels difficult. It is not because the actions themselves are inherently painful. It is because they challenge your existing identity. Your mind seeks consistency. It wants to maintain the image you have of yourself, even if that image is limiting. So when you begin to act differently, when you begin to impose structure where there was once chaos, your mind resists. It says, "This is not who we are." And in a sense it is right. You are attempting to become someone new. Self-mastery, therefore, is not about controlling isolated behaviors. It is about reshaping identity through repeated conscious action. Every time you choose discipline over impulse, you are reinforcing a new version of yourself, a version that acts with intention, a version that follows through, a version that does not collapse under the weight of temporary discomfort. But this transformation does not happen all at once. It is slow. It is incremental. It is built in moments that often seem insignificant. The moment you get up when you want to stay in bed, the moment you continue working when your mind begs for distraction, the moment you choose effort when ease is able. These moments accumulate, they form a pattern, and that pattern becomes identity. Carl Jung spoke of individuation, the process of integrating all aspects of the self into a unified whole. Discipline plays a crucial role in this process, because without it, you remain fragmented. One part of you desires growth, while another part resists it. One part seeks meaning, while another seeks comfort. Without discipline, these parts remain in conflict. With discipline, you begin to align them. You create a hierarchy within yourself where your higher intentions guide your lower impulses. You do not eliminate desire, but you place it in service of something greater. This is what it means to master yourself, not to suppress who you are, but to organize it, to take the chaos within and give it direction, to take the energy of your impulses and channel it toward purpose. And this requires consistency, not perfection. Consistency. You will fail. You will have days where you fall back into old patterns, where you give in to distraction, where you abandon your structure. This is inevitable. But self-mastery is not destroyed by failure, it is shaped by response. Do you collapse and return to old habits, or do you recognize the failure, learn from it, and continue? The disciplined individual does not expect perfection. He expects resistance. He anticipates difficulty. And because of this, he is not surprised by setbacks. He is prepared for them. He understands that discipline is not a state you reach, it is a practice you maintain. Every day you must choose it again. Every day you must reaffirm your commitment to acting with intention rather than impulse, and over time something remarkable happens. What once required effort becomes natural. What once felt forced becomes automatic. The disciplined actions you struggled to maintain begin to integrate into your identity. You no longer have to fight yourself as intensely, because the version of you that resisted has been weakened through disuse. This is the paradox of discipline. At first it feels like control, eventually it becomes freedom. Because once you have mastered your impulses, they no longer dictate your behavior. You can experience emotion without being overwhelmed by it. You can encounter distraction without being consumed by it. You can feel resistance without obeying it. You become stable, grounded, directed. And this stability allows for something deeper to emerge: clarity. When your mind is no longer scattered by constant reaction, you begin to see more clearly. You understand your goals, your values, your direction. You are no longer drifting, you are moving with purpose. This is where true power lies, not in intensity, not in bursts of motivation, but in sustained, deliberate action. Anyone can act when they feel inspired. That requires no mastery, but to act when you do not feel like it, to remain consistent when the emotional reward is absent. That is self-mastery, that is discipline, and it is rare. Because most people spend their lives negotiating with themselves. They bargain, they delay, they justify. They wait for the perfect moment, the perfect mood, the perfect conditions, but those conditions never arrive, and so they remain where they are, full of potential but lacking execution. The disciplined individual does not wait. He decides, and once he decides, he follows through, not because it is easy, but because he understands that his future is built on what he does consistently, not what he feels occasionally. This understanding changes everything. It shifts your focus from emotion to action, from desire to commitment, from intention to execution. You begin to measure your life not by how you feel, but by what you do. And this creates a sense of control, not over the external world, which will always remain unpredictable, but over yourself. And that is the only control that truly matters. Because once you have a mastery over yourself, the external world loses much of its power over you. Challenges remain, difficulties persist, uncertainty continues, but you are no longer fragile in the face of them. You have built something internal that does not easily break, a will that persists, a mind that directs, a self that is integrated. This is the outcome of discipline, not just productivity, not just success, but transformation. You become someone who can be relied upon not only by others, but by yourself. And that trust is powerful, because when you trust yourself to act, regardless of how you feel, you remove one of the greatest barriers to growth. Uncertainty. You no longer question whether you will follow through. You know you will. And that knowledge frees you to aim higher, to take on greater challenges, to pursue more meaningful goals. Because you are no longer dependent on fleeting motivation. You are anchored in discipline. And that anchor allows you to navigate the chaos of life without losing direction. So understand this clearly. Discipline is not a burden. It is a tool. It is the mechanism through which you shape your mind, your behavior, your identity. It is the path to self-mastery, and self-mastery is the foundation of everything else. Without it, your potential remains unrealized, your goals remain distant, your life remains reactive. With it, you become the architect of your own existence, not perfect, not flawless, but intentional, directed, and steadily evolving into the person you were meant to become. There is a part of you that does not want you to grow. It does not announce itself as an enemy. It does not appear as something dark and obvious that you can easily reject. Instead, it speaks in a soft, persuasive voice. It tells you to rest when you should act. It tells you to delay when you should begin. It tells you to choose comfort when discomfort is the very doorway to transformation. This part of you is not evil. It is ancient. It is the shadow, the hidden, unexamined aspect of your psyche that prefers safety over evolution, familiarity over expansion, comfort over truth. And it is always watching. The shadow does not want destruction. It wants preservation. It wants to keep you exactly as you are, because what you are is known, predictable, and therefore safe. Growth, on the other hand, is uncertain. It requires stepping into the unknown, risking failure, facing rejection, confronting inadequacy. To the shadow, this is danger, so it intervenes. Not with force, but with suggestion. It whispers, "You've done enough for today." It says, "Start tomorrow, when you're more prepared." Asterisk, it convinces you. Asterisk, you deserve a break. You've already worked hard. Asterisk, and in isolation, these thoughts seem harmless, even reasonable. But when repeated, they form a pattern, and that pattern becomes your life. You begin to notice that your days are filled with intention but lacking execution. You plan, you imagine, you can or think deeply about what you could become, but when the moment to act arrives, something holds you back. That something is not weakness in the way you think, it is protection. The shadow is protecting the identity you currently hold, because every action that leads to growth threatens to dismantle that identity. If you begin to act with discipline, consistency, and courage, then the version of you that avoids responsibility can no longer exist in the same way. And the psyche resists this. It resists not because it hates you, but because it fears dissolution. To change is to let go of who you have been, and the shadow clings to that past. It clings to habits, to routines, to familiar behaviors, even when those behaviors lead to stagnation, frustration, and quiet dissatisfaction. It would rather keep you in a known discomfort than risk an unknown transformation. This is why comfort is so dangerous. Comfort feels like peace, but often it is disguised stagnation. It is about a sense of challenge, the absence of resistance, the absence of growth. And while it may feel good in the moment, it slowly erodes your potential. It dulls your ambition. It weakens your capacity to endure difficulty. The more you indulge in comfort, the less capable you become of handling discomfort. And because growth requires discomfort, you begin to avoid growth itself. This is the trap. The shadow does not need to destroy you. It only needs to keep you comfortable enough that you never change. Think about it. How many times have you chosen distraction over effort? How many times have you avoided something difficult by telling yourself it can wait? How many times have you convinced yourself that you will begin later? Each of those moments is a negotiation with the shadow. At each time you choose comfort, the shadow grows stronger. It learns. It adapts. It becomes more convincing. Until eventually its voice becomes indistinguishable from your own. You begin to believe, your desire for comfort is simply who you are. You say, I'm just not disciplined. You say, I'm not the type of person who does that. You say, this is just how I am. But this is not identity. It is conditioning. And conditioning can be broken, but to break it, you must first see it. You must become aware of the shadow's influence in your daily life. You must begin to notice when comfort is pulling you away from growth. You must question the impulses that lead you toward ease and away from effort. This requires honesty, brutal honesty, because the shadow thrives in self-deception. It convinces you that your choices are justified, that your delays are reasonable, that your avoidance is necessary. It tells you stories, and you believe them. To confront the shadow is to challenge those stories. It is to look at your behavior without distortion and ask, is this truly what I want, or is this what is easy? That question alone can begin to shift your awareness, because once you recognize that comfort is not neutral, that it has a direction, that it pulls you towards stagnation, you begin to see it differently. You begin to see that every choice carries weight. Every moment of comfort is a moment not spent growing. Every avoidance of discomfort is a missed opportunity for transformation. This does not mean that all comfort is bad. Rest is necessary, recovery is essential, but there is a difference between conscious rest and unconscious avoidance. Conscious rest is intentional, it serves a purpose, it prepares you for further action. Unconscious comfort is reactive, it avoids effort, it delays growth. The shadow blurs this distinction. It convinces you that avoidance is rest, it tells you that distraction is recovery. And if you are not careful, you will spend your life recovering from work you never truly did. To break free from this, you must develop a new relationship with discomfort. You must begin to see it not as something to avoid, but as something to move toward. Because discomfort is the signal of growth. It is the indicator that you are stepping beyond your current limits, that you are challenging your existing identity, that you are expanding. The shadow will resist this. It will intensify its voice. It will offer stronger temptations, more convincing justifications, deeper rationalizations. But this is where transformation occurs, not when things are easy, not when you feel motivated, but when you feel the pull of comfort and choose to act anyway. That moment is everything, because in that moment you are not just completing a task, you are weakening the shadow. You are proving to yourself that its voice is not absolute. You are reclaiming control. And each time you do this, the shadow loses influence, not immediately, not completely, but gradually. Its voice becomes quieter. Its arguments become less persuasive, its grip loosens, and in its place, something else begins to emerge. A stronger will, a clearer awareness, a sense of direction that is not dictated by impulse. You begin to realize that you are not at the mercy of your desires. You are capable of choosing beyond them. This is the beginning of integration, not the destruction of the shadow, but its transformation. Because the shadow contains energy, it contains drive, instinct, raw force. When left unchecked, it pulls you toward comfort and stagnation, but when integrated, it becomes fuel. The same force that once led you to avoid effort can be redirected toward sustained action. The same intensity that once fueled distraction can be harnessed for focus. But this can only happen if you confront it. If you deny the shadow, it controls you unconsciously. If you face it, you begin to understand it. And understanding leads to mastery. So the goal is not to eliminate your desire for comfort. The goal is to place it in its proper context, to recognize when it is appropriate and when it is destructive, to feel the pull of ease and not be enslaved by it, to acknowledge the voice that says, stay where you are, and respond with action that says, move forward anyway. This is not easy. It will feel unnatural. It will feel like resistance, because you are going against deeply ingrained patterns, but that resistance is the path. It is the sign that you are confronting the shadow, and every step you take through that resistance is a step toward becoming something more aware, more capable, more aligned with your potential, because in the end, the shadow does not disappear. It remains a part of you, but it no longer leads. It no longer dictates. It becomes something you understand, something you manage, something you integrate. And when that happens, comfort loses its power over you. It becomes a choice, not a compulsion. And growth becomes something you move toward, not something you avoid. That is the transformation. That is the shift from being guided by the shadow to standing above it, not in denial, but in awareness, not in suppression, but in mastery. And once you reach that point, you will see clearly. The shadow always loved comfort, but you were meant for more. There is a quiet deception that lives at the center of the human mind, the belief that meaning must be found before action can begin. People wait. They search, they analyze their lives endlessly, hoping that clarity will arrive like a revelation, that purpose will descend upon them fully formed, undeniable, and complete. And so they remain still. They stand at the edge of their own potential, looking inward, questioning, doubting, hesitating. They tell themselves that once they understand their purpose, once they feel certain, once everything aligns, then they will act. But this is the illusion. Meaning is not something you discover in stillness. It is something you create through movement. Action is not the result of meaning. It is the source of it. This is difficult for the mind to accept because the mind seeks certainty. It wants guarantees. It wants to know that the path ahead is correct before taking the first step. It fears wasted effort. It fears failure. It fears the possibility that after all the struggle, the chosen path may not lead to fulfillment. And so, it delays. But in delaying, it creates the very emptiness it fears. Because meaning cannot emerge in a vacuum. It requires engagement. It requires friction. It requires participation in the world. Carl Jung understood that the psyche is not a static entity. It evolves through interaction, through experience, through confrontation with reality. The self is not revealed in isolation. It is shaped, tested, and refined through action. Without action, there is no feedback. Without feedback, there is no growth. And without growth, there is no meaning. You cannot think your way into purpose. You must live your way into it. Consider the individual who spends years contemplating what they should do with their life. They read, they reflect, they imagine different futures, but they never commit to any of them. They remain in a state of perpetual analysis, believing that one day the right answer will appear. But it never does, because the right answer is not something that exists independently of action. It is something that is formed through it. When you act, you encounter reality. You discover what challenges you, what engages you, what drains you, what excites you. You begin to see patterns in your responses. You learn what aligns with your deeper nature and what does not. This information cannot be accessed through thought alone. It must be experienced. Action, therefore, is a form of exploration. It is how you navigate the unknown terrain of your own potential. Every step you take reveals something new, not only about the world, but about yourself. And through this process, meaning begins to emerge, not as a sudden revelation, but as a gradual construction. It is built piece by piece, through effort, through struggle, through persistence. This is why action often feels uncomfortable, because it forces you into the unknown. It removes the illusion of control that exists in thought and replaces it with the unpredictability of reality. When you act, you risk failure. You risk judgment. You risk discovering that you are not as capable as you believed. But you also gain something far more valuable. You gain truth, and truth is the foundation of meaning. Because meaning is not about feeling good. It is about being aligned with something real, something that challenges you, something that requires you to grow, something that demands your participation. The individual who avoids action in search of meaning often falls into a state of stagnation. They feel lost, disconnected, uncertain. They question their value, their direction, their purpose. But the problem is not that they lack meaning. The P problem is that they lack movement. They are waiting for clarity that can only be earned through engagement, and so they remain trapped thinking, planning, imagining, but never becoming. To break this cycle, you must reverse the process. You must act first, even without certainty, even without complete understanding. You must step forward into something, anything, and begin. This does not mean reckless action. It does not mean abandoning thought entirely. It means recognizing that thought alone is insufficient. You need both. But action must lead, because action grounds you in reality. It forces you to confront the consequences of your choices. It provides feedback that refines your understanding. It reveals strengths you did not know you had and weaknesses you did not know existed. And through this process, you begin to shape yourself. You begin to form identity, not based on abstract ideas but on lived experience. You become someone who does, rather than someone who thinks about doing. This shift is profound, because once you begin to act consistently, something changes within you. You start to trust yourself. You realize that you are capable of movement even in the absence of certainty. You no longer need perfect conditions to begin. You no longer need complete clarity to proceed. You develop momentum, and momentum creates its own form of meaning. Because when you are moving, when you are engaged, when you are actively participating in your own life, you feel a sense of direction even if that direction is still evolving. You are no longer stagnant, you are becoming. And becoming is where meaning lives. It does not exist at the destination. It exists in the process, in the effort, in the struggle, in the continuous act of shaping yourself through what you do. This is why action must take precedence over feeling. Because if you wait to feel motivated, you will remain inactive. If you wait to feel certain, you will remain uncertain. If you wait to feel ready, you will never begin. Feelings are unstable. Action is decisive. And it is through decisive action that meaning is forged. The disciplined individual understands this. He does not wait for inspiration. He creates it through movement. He does not rely on motivation. He builds structure that allows him to act regardless of how he feels. And in doing so, he accumulates experience. He gathers knowledge. He develops competence. And competence leads to confidence, not the other way around. This is another illusion that must be broken. People believe they must feel confident before they act. But confidence is the result of action. It is built through repetition, through exposure, through overcoming difficulty. It cannot be manufactured in isolation. You cannot think yourself into confidence. You must act yourself into it. And as confidence grows, so does your capacity to engage with more complex challenges. You begin to take on greater responsibility, abilities, pursue larger goals, explore deeper aspects of yourself. And with each step, meaning expands. It becomes richer, more defined, more personal, because it is no longer something you are searching for. It is something you are creating. This creation is not always pleasant. There will be moments of doubt, of frustration, of exhaustion. There will be times when the effort feels overwhelming, when the results are not immediate, when the path seems unclear. But these moments are not signs that you are lost. They are signs that you are engaged. They are part of the process. Meaning is not built in comfort. It is built in challenge, in the willingness to continue despite uncertainty, in the decision to act even when the outcome is unknown. This is where most people turn back. They encounter difficulty and interpret it as a sign that they are on the wrong path. They feel discomfort and assume it means they should stop. But discomfort is not a signal to retreat. It is a signal that you are pushing beyond your current limits, and that is where growth occurs. If you avoid this discomfort, you also avoid the possibility of discovering something meaningful. You remain within the boundaries of what is known, what is easy, what is familiar. But meaning does not exist there. It exists beyond those boundaries, and the only way to reach it is through action, through repeated, deliberate engagement with the world, through the courage to step forward without guarantees, through the willingness to fail, to learn, to adapt, and to continue. This is the path of individuation, not a passive journey of discovery, but an active process of creation. You do not find yourself. You build yourself, through what you do, through how you respond, through the choices you make in moments of uncertainty. Every action you take is a statement. It says, "This is who I am becoming," and over time these statements accumulate. They form a narrative. They create life, and that life shaped through consistent action becomes meaningful, not because it is perfect, not because it is free of struggle, but because it is real, because it reflects effort, because it embodies growth, because it is the result of conscious participation. So understand this clearly. You will not think your way into a meaningful life. You will not wait your way into purpose. You will not feel your way into clarity. You must act, you must move, you must engage. And in doing so, you will begin to see something that was never visible in stillness. Meaning is not something that exists out there waiting to be found. It is something that emerges from what you do, from the steps you take, from the effort you invest, from the courage you show in the face of uncertainty. It is built, moment by moment, action by action, until one day you look back not at what you felt, not at what you imagined, but at what you did and you realize. That is where your came from. That is what shaped you. That is what made your life your own. There is a truth that most people spend their entire lives trying to avoid, a truth so fundamental, so unavoidable, that the more you run from it, the more it shapes you from the shadows. That truth is this: suffering is not an accident of life, it is a requirement of it. From the moment you become aware of yourself, from the moment you begin to think, to feel, to desire, suffering enters the picture, not as a punishment, not as an error in the design of existence, but as an inherent part of growth, of transformation, of becoming. And yet the modern mind has been conditioned to reject this completely. It seeks comfort above all. It seeks ease, pleasure, convenience, and the absence of pain. It builds systems, habits, and identities around the avoidance of discomfort. It interprets suffering as something that has gone wrong, something to be eliminated as quickly as possible. But in doing so, it knowingly eliminates the very conditions required for evolution. Because suffering is not merely something to endure, it is something that shapes you. It is the force that reveals your limits, that exposes your weaknesses, that confronts you with the parts of yourself you would rather ignore. It is the friction that transforms potential into reality. Without suffering, there is no pressure. Without pressure, there is no change. And without change, there is no growth. Carl Jung understood that the psyche does not develop in comfort. It develops through conflict, through the tension between what you are and what you could become. This tension is experienced as discomfort, as struggle, as suffering. It is the gap between your current state and your potential. And that gap must be crossed, but it cannot be crossed without resistance. This is why suffering feels so intense, because it is not just physical or emotional pain, it is psychological confrontation. It is the breaking of old patterns, the dismantling of familiar identities, the challenge to everything you have known yourself to be. When you attempt to grow, something within you resists. That resistance creates suffering. It is the part of you that wants to remain unchanged, that fears the unknown, that clings to what is familiar even if what is familiar is limiting, even if it is painful in its own way. So you are caught between two forms of suffering: the suffering of remaining the same, and the suffering of becoming something new. Most people choose the first, not consciously but by default, because it is known. It is predictable. It does not require the same level of confrontation. They accept dissatisfaction, stagnation, unfulfilled potential not because they want to, but because the alternative feels more uncertain, more demanding, more painful in the short term. But what they fail to realize is that this choice does not eliminate suffering. It only delays and deepens it, because a pain of unrealized potential accumulates. It grows quietly beneath the surface, manifesting as restlessness, as frustration, as a sense that something is missing. This is a different kind of suffering, less immediate but more persistent, less visible but more corrosive, and it follows you. No matter how much comfort you surround yourself with, no matter how many distractions you engage in, it remains. Because it is not caused by external conditions. It is caused by the distance between who you are and who you could be. The only way to resolve this is not to eliminate suffering but to choose it consciously, to step into the kind of suffering that leads somewhere, the kind that builds, that strengthens, that transforms. This is the paradox. You must suffer to reduce suffering. You must endure short-term discomfort to avoid long-term regret. You must face what is difficult now to prevent what is unbearable later. This requires a fundamental shift in perception. You must stop seeing suffering as something purely negative. You must begin to see it as information, as feedback, as a signal that you are being pushed beyond your current limits. When you feel resistance, when you feel discomfort, when you feel the urge to escape, that is often the exact point where growth is possible, but only if you remain, only if you do not turn away. This is where discipline intersects with suffering. Discipline is the decision to stay. to continue acting in the presence of discomfort, to persist when every part of you is urging you to stop, not because you enjoy the pain, but because you understand its purpose, because you recognize that on the other side of that resistance lies transformation. This is not easy. It is one of the most difficult things a person can do, because suffering challenges your identity. It forces you to confront your limitations, your fears, your insecurities. It strips away illusions and exposes reality, and reality is often uncomfortable, but it is also where growth happens. The individual who learns to endure suffering consciously gains something invaluable: resilience. Not the superficial kind, but deep psychological resilience, the ability to face difficulty without collapsing, to endure pressure without breaking, to continue moving forward even when progress is slow and uncertain. This resilience becomes a foundation because life will not become easier. Challenges will not disappear, but your capacity to handle them will increase. And that changes everything, because now you are no longer defined by what happens to you. You are defined by how you respond. And that response is shaped through suffering. Every time you endure difficulty and continue, you reinforce a new pattern, a pattern of strength, a pattern of persistence, a pattern of growth, and over time this pattern becomes identity. You begin to see yourself differently, not as someone who avoids pain, but as someone who could move through it, not as someone who is fragile, but as someone who is capable. This shift is profound, because it removes one of the greatest barriers to action: fear. Fear is often not of the event itself, but of the suffering associated with it, the fear of failure, the fear of rejection, the fear of discomfort. But once you have experienced suffering and realize that you can endure it, that it does not destroy you, that it does not define you, that fear begins to lose its power. You become more willing to take risks, more willing to step into the unknown, more willing to pursue what matters, even when it is difficult, because you no longer see suffering as something to avoid at all costs. You see it as part of the path, as something that accompanies growth rather than obstructs it. This is the mindset of transformation. It does not glorify suffering for its own sake. It does not seek pain unnecessarily, but it does not run from it either. It accepts it. It uses. It understands that without it, nothing meaningful can be built. This applies to every area of life, to discipline where the discomfort of effort leads to capability, to relationships where the difficulty of honesty leads to depth, to purpose where the struggle of pursuit leads to fulfillment. In each case, suffering is the cost of something greater, and the question is not whether you will suffer. You will. The question is what your suffering will produce. Will it lead to stagnation or transformation? Will it be passive or purposeful? Will it break you or build you? The answer depends on how you engage with it. If you resist it, avoid it, deny it will control you. If you face it, accept it, move through it will shape you. And this shaping is essential, because to become who you are capable of becoming, you must let go of who you currently are. And that process is not comfortable. It involves loss. It involves uncertainty. It involves stepping into parts of yourself that are undeveloped, untested, unknown. It is, in many ways, a form of psychological death, the death of old habits, the death of limiting beliefs, the death of identities that no longer serve you. And death, even in this symbolic sense, is painful. But it is also necessary, because without it, there is no rebirth, no renewal, no transformation. This is the deeper meaning of suffering. It is not just about enduring pain. It is about allowing yourself to be changed by it, to emerge from it different, stronger, clearer, more aligned. But this only happens if you engage with it consciously, if you reflect, if you learn, if you adapt. Otherwise, suffering becomes repetitive. You experience the same struggles, the same patterns, the same frustrations without growth. This is unconscious suffering, and it leads nowhere. Conscious suffering, on the other hand, is intentional. It is directed. It is endured with awareness and purpose, and it leads to trauma and formation. So the next time you encounter suffering, whether it is physical, emotional, or psychological, pause. Do not immediately seek escape. Do not assume something is wrong. Instead, ask, what is this asking of me? What is this revealing? How can this shape me? These questions shift your relationship with suffering. They turn it from an obstacle into a teacher, from something to avoid into something to engage with. And through this engagement, you begin to extract meaning from pain. You begin to see that your struggles are not random. They are part of a process that, if navigated consciously, leads to growth, to strength, to individuation. This is the path very few choose. because it requires courage, it requires honesty, it requires the willingness to face discomfort without immediate relief, but it is also the path that leads to something real, something lasting, something earned. Because in the end, a life without suffering is not a life of peace. It is a life of stagnation, and a life shaped through conscious suffering is a life of depth, of resilience, of meaning. So do not see it as your enemy. See it for what it is. A necessary force, a shaping force, a force that, if embraced, will transform you into something far greater than you were before, not despite the pain, but because of it. There is a silent force that dismantles human potential more effectively than failure, more subtly than fear, and more persistently than doubt. It is chaos. Not the dramatic chaos of catastrophe or visible destruction, but the quiet, internal disorder that lives within the unstructured mind. It appears harmless at first: unplanned days, inconsistent effort, scattered attention, but over time it erodes clarity, weakens will, and dissolves direction. Most people do not recognize it. They believe they are free. They wake when they wish, act when they feel motivated, drift between tasks, respond to impulses, follow distractions, and call this flexibility, spontaneity, even creativity. But beneath this apparent freedom lies fragmentation, because without structure, the mind does not organize itself, it disperses. It moves from one stimulus to another, from one desire to the next, never fully committing, never fully engaging, never fully becoming. Energy is spent, but nothing substantial is built. This is the nature of chaos. It is not the absence of activity, it is the absence of direction, and direction is what gives life meaning. Carl Jung understood that the psyche requires order, not rigid control, but a framework within which the self can develop. Without such a framework, the different aspects of the personality remain unintegrated, pulling in different directions, creating internal conflict. One part of you seeks growth, another seeks comfort. One part desires discipline, another resists it. Without structure, these parts compete. They interrupt, each other, weaken each other, and ultimately prevent coherent action. You feel this as inconsistency, as lack of focus, as the inability to follow through. But this is not a failure of character, it is a failure of structure. Because structure is what aligns these internal forces, it channels them, it gives them direction, and is the deliberate organization of your time, your energy, your attention in a way that supports your growth rather than undermines it. It is the decision to remove unnecessary choices so that your actions become consistent. Most people underestimate the power of this. They believe that success, growth, and transformation come from intense bursts of effort, from moments of inspiration, from sudden changes, from dramatic decisions. But these moments are unstable. They cannot be relied upon. Routine, however, is stable. It does not depend on how you feel. It does not require constant motivation. It operates regardless of mood, regardless of external conditions, and because of this, it creates continuity. Continuity leads to accumulation, and accumulation leads to transformation. This is how small, repeated actions, when structured into a routine, become powerful. They compound, they build upon each other, they create momentum. But without routine, even the best intention, they dissolve. You may begin with energy, with clarity, with purpose, but without a system to sustain it, that energy fades, that clarity blurs, that purpose weakens. You return to inconsistency, to chaos, and this cycle repeats. This is why routine is essential, not because it is exciting, but because it is reliable. It provides a foundation, a stable base from which growth can occur. Imagine trying to build something meaningful on unstable ground. No matter how strong your effort, no matter how clear your vision, the structure will collapse. Routine stabilizes the ground. It creates predictability in your behavior, and predictability is what allows progress to be measured, refined, and sustained. But there is another, deeper aspect to this. Routine does not only organize your external actions, it organizes your internal world. When your day has structure, your mind becomes clearer. You know what needs to be done. You know when it will be done. You reduce uncertainty, and uncertainty is one of the primary sources of anxiety. Chaos thrives in uncertainty. It feeds on indecision, on lack of clarity, on unstructured time. Routine eliminates much of this. It replaces ambiguity with intention. Instead of asking, "What should I do now?" you follow a path that has already been chosen. This reduces mental friction. It conserves energy, and that energy can then be directed toward execution. This is where discipline and routine intersect. Discipline is the force that initiates action. Routine is the system that sustains it. Together they create consistency, and consistency is what separates potential from reality, because potential without consistency remains unrealized. It exists only as possibility. Routine turns possibility into pattern, and pattern into identity. You become what you repeatedly do, not what you occasionally attempt. This is a difficult truth to accept, because it removes excuses. It shifts responsibility from external conditions to internal structure. It forces you to confront the fact that your current results are not random. They are the outcome of your routines, your habits, your patterns. If those patterns are chaotic, your results will be chaotic. If they are structured, your results will reflect that structure. So the question is not whether you are capable. The question is whether your daily actions are aligned with what you want to become. Routine is the mechanism that creates that alignment, but it must be intentional. It must be designed. You cannot drift into an effective routine. You must build it. You must decide what matters. You must determine how your time should be spent. You must prioritize actions that contribute to growth and eliminate those that do not. This requires clarity. It requires honesty, because many of the things that fill your day are not essential. They are distractions. They are habits formed unconsciously, reinforced over time and maintained. Without question. Routine forces you to question them. It forces you to examine how you spend your time and whether that aligns with your goals. And in doing so, it reveals something important. Most chaos is self-created, not intentionally, but through lack of awareness, through absence of structure, through the failure to impose order on your own behavior. This is both a challenge and an opportunity, because if chaos is self-created, it can also be self-corrected through routine. But this correction is not immediate. It requires persistence. At first, routine will feel restrictive. It will feel unnatural. You will resist it, because you are used to flexibility, to reacting rather than directing. But over time, this resistance fades. The structure becomes familiar. The actions become automatic. And what once felt like constraint begins to feel like stability, like control, like freedom. Because now, you are no longer at the mercy of your impulses. You are not constantly deciding what to do next. You are following a system that supports your growth. And within that system, you can still adapt, still adjust, still evolve. Routine is not rigidity. It is a framework, a structure that can be refined as you learn more about yourself, your goals, your capabilities. But without that framework, there is no foundation, only chaos. And chaos does not build, it disperses, it fragments, it weakens. Routine does the opposite. It gathers, it focuses, it strengthens. It takes scattered effort and turns it into directed energy, and directed energy creates results. This is why the most effective individuals rely on routine, not because they lack creativity, but because they understand that creativity requires a stable base, that innovation requires consistency, that growth requires repetition. They do not leave their actions to chance. They design their days. They create systems. They follow them, not perfectly but consistently. And through that consistency, they achieve what others only imagine. This is not about perfection. It is about direction. You will not follow your routine flawlessly. There will be disruptions. There will be days where you fall off track. But the power of routine lies not in never breaking it but in returning to it, again and again. Each time reinforcing the pattern. Each time strengthening the structure, until it becomes part of who you are, until chaos no longer dominates your life, until your actions are no longer random but intentional. And when that happens, something shifts. You begin to feel a sense of control, not over everything but over yourself, and that is enough. Because once you can direct your own behavior, you can begin to shape your outcomes. You can move toward your goals with consistency. You can build something meaningful. You can create a life that reflects your intentions rather than your impulses. This is the true power of routine. It is not glamorous. It is not exciting, but it is effective, and effectiveness is what matters. Because in the end, your life is not defined by what you intend to do. It is defined by what you do repeatedly. Routine determines that. It is the invisible structure behind visible results, the quiet force that turns effort into achievement, the system that transforms chaos into order. And order is where growth becomes possible. There is a quiet law governing human transformation that most people sense but rarely articulate. It is not found in moments of intensity, nor in declarations of intent, nor in the dramatic promises one makes in the solitude of reflection. It does not emerge fully formed in a single decision, nor is it secured by a surge of motivation. It reveals itself slowly, almost invisibly, through repetition. Identity is not something you discover in a sudden flash of insight, it is something you construct, and the materials of that construction are your repeated actions. Every action you take, no matter how small, is not merely a task completed in isolation. It is a signal, a reinforcement, a vote cast in favor of a particular version of yourself. When you act with discipline, you are not just completing a task, you are reinforcing the identity of someone who is disciplined. When you avoid responsibility, you are not merely postponing effort, you are strengthening the identity of someone who avoids. These actions accumulate, they do not remain separate, they organize themselves into patterns, and those patterns solidify into identity. This is why repetition is so powerful, not because it guarantees immediate results, but because it shapes who you become. Carl Jung spoke of individuation, the process of becoming whole, of integrating the different aspects of the psyche into a coherent self. This process does not occur through thought alone, it requires action, repeated, intentional action, because without action there is no embodiment. Without embodiment, there is no transformation. You may believe you are capable of greatness. You may imagine a disciplined, focused, resilient version of yourself, but if your daily actions do not reflect that image, it remains a fantasy. Repetition bridges the gap between imagination and reality. It takes what is abstract and makes it concrete. It transforms intention into identity, but this transformation is gradual, and that is where most people falter. They seek immediate change, they want to feel different quickly, they want results that validate their efforts, but identity does not operate on that timescale. It is built slowly, through consistency, through the quiet persistence of doing the same things again and again, even when they seem insignificant, even when progress is not visible. This is where trust becomes essential. You must trust that your actions are shaping you even when you cannot yet see the outcome, because the effect of repetition is often delayed. It works beneath the surface. Like water carving through stone, each drop appears insignificant, but over time it reshapes the structure entirely. Your habits function in the same way. Each repetition strengthens a neural pathway, each action reinforces a pattern, and eventually what once required effort becomes automatic. This is the transition from behavior to identity. At first you act with intention. You must remind yourself, you must exert effort, but with repetition the action becomes easier, more natural, less forced, until it begins to feel like who you are. This is when identity has shifted, not when you declare it, but when your actions align with it without resistance. However, this process works in both directions. Just as positive repetition builds a strong identity, negative repetition builds a limiting one. If you repeatedly avoid challenges, you become someone who avoids. If you consistently give in to distraction, you become someone who cannot focus. If you regularly abandon your commitments, you become someone who does not follow through. These patterns form whether you are aware of them or not. Identity is always being shaped. The only question is whether you are shaping it intentionally or allowing it to form by default. Most people underestimate this. They believe their identity is fixed, that they simply are the way they are. But this is an illusion. What they perceive as identity is often just a collection of repeated behaviors, patterns that have been reinforced over time. And what has been built through repetition can be changed through repetition. This is where responsibility emerges. Because once you understand that your actions shape your identity, you can no longer see them as trivial. There is no neutral action. Every behavior either reinforces or weakens a particular aspect of who you are. Every choice matters, not because of its immediate outcome but because of what it contributes to your pattern. This realization can feel overwhelming because it suggests that change requires sustained effort, that there is no shortcut, no single moment that transforms everything. But it is also empowering because it means that change is always accessible. You do not need extraordinary ability. You do not need perfect conditions. You only need consistency. You only need to repeat the actions that align with the person you want to become, again and again, day after day, until they become part of you. But this requires patience, because the early stages of repetition are the most difficult. You act, but it feels unnatural. You persist, but the results are not visible. You question whether it is working. This is the period where many abandon the process. They mistake the absence of immediate results for failure. They do not realize that the change is occurring internally, that the structure is being formed beneath the surface. This is why perseverance is essential. Anshal. You must continue even when the evidence is not yet apparent. You must act as the person you want to become before you fully feel like that person, because feeling follows action, not the other way around. This reverses a common assumption. Many believe they must feel motivated, confident, or ready before they act. But identity is not built on feelings, it is built on behavior. And behavior can be directed regardless of how you feel. When you act consistently in a certain way, your mind begins to adjust. It seeks coherence between your actions and your self-image. It begins to update its perception of who you are. This is how identity evolves, not through introspection alone, but through repeated evidence. You prove to yourself through action that you are capable, that you are disciplined, that you are consistent, and this proof accumulates. It builds confidence, not the fragile confidence that depends on external validation, but a deeper, more stable form, and confidence that comes from knowing, through experience, that you can rely on yourself. This is one of the most valuable outcomes of repetition, self-trust, because without self-trust even the best intentions collapse. You make plans, but you do not follow them. You set goals, but you do not pursue them. You lose faith in your own ability to act. Repetition restores that faith. Each completed action reinforces the belief that you can do what you say you will do. And over time, this belief becomes identity. You are no longer trying to be consistent. You are consistent. You are no longer attempting discipline. You are disciplined. This shift is subtle but profound, because once an identity is established, it guides behavior automatically. You no longer rely solely on willpower. Your actions align with who you believe yourself to be. This reduces internal conflict. It simplifies decision-making. It creates stability, but reaching this point requires deliberate effort. You must choose your actions carefully. You must decide what kind of person you want to become and then identify the behaviors that reflect that identity. And then you must repeat them, not occasionally, not when it is convenient, but consistently. This is where structure becomes important. Because without structure, repetition is unreliable. You may act with intention one day and drift the next. Consistency requires a system, a routine, a framework that supports repeated action. This does not mean rigidity, it means intentionality. You design your environment, your schedule, your habits in a way that makes repetition easier. Because the easier it is to act, the more likely you are to repeat the behavior. And the more you repeat it, the stronger the identity becomes. This is how small actions become powerful, not through intensity, but through frequency. A single action may seem insignificant, but repeated over time, it becomes a defining feature of who you are. This is why you must pay attention to the small things, the daily choices, the seemingly minor behaviors, because they are not minor. They are the building blocks of your identity, and over time they determine the trajectory of your life. If you repeat actions that align with growth, you will grow. If you repeat actions that align with avoidance, you will stagnate. The outcome is not determined by a single moment, but by the pattern, and patterns are created through repetition. This is the quiet truth that governs transformation. It is not dramatic, it is not immediate, but it is reliable. And if you understand it, you can use it. You can take control of your development. You can consciously shape your identity, not through declarations but through actions, repeated, consistent, intentional actions. This is how change becomes real. This is how potential becomes actual. This is how you become who you are meant to be, not in a moment, but in the accumulation of many moments, each one reinforcing the next, each one contributing to the whole, until the pattern is undeniable, until the identity is established, until you is no longer a question, but a reflection of what you have done, again and again over time. There is a moment, subtle yet decisive, that determines the direction of a human life. It does not arrive with noise or spectacle. It is not marked by external recognition or dramatic change. It occurs quietly, within the inner chambers of the psyche, where a choice is made not merely about action, but about identity. In that moment, one either negotiates or decides. Weakness negotiates, strength decides. This distinction is not about physical power, nor about dominance over others. It is about the relationship you have with yourself, your impulses, your fears, your desires, and your capacity to act in alignment with something higher than immediate comfort. Weakness is not the absence of ability. It is the fragmentation of will. It is the condition in which different parts of the self compete for control, and instead of integration, there is compromise. Instead of direction, there is hesitation. Instead of action, there is internal debate. You experience this as negotiation. I will start tomorrow. I will do it later. I will try, but not too hard. I deserve a break. I am not ready yet. These are not merely thoughts. They are negotiations with resistance. And resistance is the voice of the part of you that seeks safety over growth, comfort over expansion, familiarity over transformation. It is not evil. It is primitive. It exists to protect you from risk, from failure, from discomfort. But what protects you in the short term often limits you in the long term. And if you allow this voice to dominate, your life becomes a series of negotiations. You bargain with your potential. You dilute your effort. You reduce your standards. You compromise your direction until, for example, eventually, you no longer recognize the person you intended to become. This is the quiet tragedy of weakness. It does not destroy you suddenly. It erodes you gradually. Each negotiation seems insignificant. Each compromise feels justified. But together they form a pattern. And that pattern becomes identity. You become someone who negotiates with difficulty. Someone who hesitates. Someone who delays. Someone who avoids. Not because you lack the capacity for strength, but because you have reinforced the habit of negotiation. Strength, however, operates differently. Strength does not argue with resistance. It does not engage in prolonged internal debate. It does not seek permission from comfort. Strength decides. A decision is different from a preference. A preference says, I would like to do this. A decision says, this will be done. It carries finality, clarity, direction. When you decide, you eliminate alternatives. You close the door on negotiation. You come with, and commitment is what transforms intention into action. But this is where many misunderstand strength. They believe it is about intensity, about sudden bursts of motivation, about dramatic declarations of change. But true strength is quieter. It is more stable. It is the ability to make a decision and then act on it consistently, regardless of how you feel. Because feelings are unstable, they fluctuate. They are influenced by external conditions, internal states, past experiences. If your actions depend on your feelings, they will be inconsistent, and inconsistency prevents growth. Strength removes this dependency. It places action above emotion, not by ignoring emotion, but by not being controlled by it. This requires integration. In Jungian terms, it requires confronting and assimilating the parts of yourself that resist discipline, that seek avoidance, that fear discomfort. If you do not face these parts, they operate unconsciously. They influence your behavior without your awareness. They create resistance. They generate excuses. They lead you into negotiation. But when you bring them into awareness, something changes. You begin to see the patterns. You recognize the voice of avoidance. You understand its origin. And through this understanding, you gain the ability to choose differently. This is where strength begins. Not in the absence of weakness, but in the awareness of it. Because you cannot decide firmly if you are unaware of what you are deciding against. A true decision is not simply moving towards something. It is also rejecting something else. When you decide to act, you are rejecting delay. When you decide to commit, you are rejecting hesitation. When you decide to persist, you are rejecting the urge to quit. This dual nature of decision is what gives it power. It creates clarity, and clarity eliminates internal conflict. Weakness thrives in ambiguity. It uses uncertainty as a gateway for negotiation. Maybe later. Perhaps not today. We will see. These phrases keep the door open. They allow resistance to remain active. They prevent closure. Strength closes the door. It says, now, and then it acts. But this level of decisiveness is not natural for most people, because it requires responsibility. When you decide, you take ownership of the outcome. You can no longer blame circumstances, timing, or external factors. You have chosen a path, and with that choice comes accountability. This is why many avoid decisive action. They prefer negotiation because it preserves the illusion of possibility without the burden of commitment. As long as you have not decided, you can still imagine success without risking failure. But this is an illusion, because without decision there is no movement, and without movement there is no progress. You remain in potential, undefined, unrealized. Strength accepts the risk. It understands that failure is a possibility, but stagnation is a certainty without action, so it decides. And in deciding, it creates momentum. Momentum is critical, because once you begin to act, the process reinforces itself. Each action strengthens your sense of agency. Each completed task builds confidence. Each step forward reduces resistance. But the hardest part is always the beginning. the moment of decision, because that is where you confront yourself. You face the part of you that wants to delay, that wants to negotiate, that wants to remain comfortable, and you must override it, not once but repeatedly. Because strength is not a single act, it is a pattern of decisive behavior. Each time you choose action over negotiation, you reinforce that pattern. Each time you follow through on a decision, you strengthen your identity. You become someone who decides, someone who acts, someone who does not bargain with their own potential. This is how identity shifts, not through intention alone, but through repeated evidence. You prove to yourself, again and again, that you are capable of decisive action. And this proof accumulates. It builds self-trust, because you begin to see that your decisions are not empty. They lead to action, and action leads to results. This creates a feedback loop. The more you decide and act, the more confident you become in your ability to do so. And the more confident you become, the less you feel the need to negotiate, because you trust yourself to follow through. But this process requires discipline, because there will always be moments where negotiation feels easier, where delay seems justified, where avoidance appears rational. In those moments you must remember that every negotiation reinforces weakness, and every decision reinforces strength. There is no neutral ground. You are always moving in one direction or the other. This is what makes daily choices so important. Not because each one is significant in isolation, but they accumulate, they form patterns, and patterns form identity. If you consistently negotiate, you become weak in will. If you consistently decide, you become strong in action. This does not mean you must be perfect. You will falter. You will have moments of hesitation. You will sometimes give in to negotiation. But what matters is the overall pattern, the direction, the frequency with which you choose decision over delay. Because over time, this frequency determines who you become. Strength is not about never feeling resistance. It is about not being controlled by it. It is about recognizing the impulse to negotiate and choosing to act anyway. It is about shortening the gap between thought and action. The stronger you become, the shorter this gap gets, until eventually there is almost no delay. You decide, and you act. This is efficiency. This is clarity. This is power. Not power over others, but power over yourself. And self-mastery is the foundation of for all meaningful achievement, because if you cannot direct your own behavior, you cannot shape your life. You remain reactive, driven by impulses, controlled by circumstances. But when you can decide and act consistently, you become proactive. You create direction. You shape outcomes. You build something intentional. This is the transformation from weakness to strength. It does not happen overnight. It is built through repetition, through daily decisions, through the refusal to negotiate with your lower impulses, through the commitment to act in alignment with your higher intentions. And over time, this commitment becomes identity. You are no longer someone who is trying to be strong. You are someone who is strong, because your actions reflect it, consistently, reliably, without negotiation. And when you reach this point, something profound happens. Life becomes simpler, not easier, but clearer. You no longer waste energy in internal debate. You no longer deliver unnecessarily. You move, you act, you progress. And in that movement you create meaning, because meaning is not found in contemplation alone. It is found in action, in the expression of your will, in the realization of your potential. And that realization begins with a decision, a firm, unambiguous decision to stop negotiating and to start acting again and again, until it becomes who you are. There comes a point in every human life where the greatest obstacle is no longer the external world, but the self that was once necessary for survival. This is a difficult truth to accept, because the very patterns, beliefs, and behaviors that once protected you, guided you, and helped you navigate uncertainty eventually become the limitations that prevent your growth. What once served you begins to confine you, and yet, most people resist this realization. They cling to familiar identities, defend outdated versions of themselves, and attempt to move forward without letting go of what holds them back. But growth does not work that way. You do not rise by adding more to who you are. You rise by outgrowing what you have been. To outgrow yourself is not to reject your past. It is to transcend it. It is to recognize that the person you were is not sufficient for the person you must become. And this recognition creates tension, because identity seeks stability. It wants consistency, predictability, coherence. It resists change. It resists contradiction. It resists the idea that what once defined you is no longer enough. This resistance is natural, but it is also dangerous, Because if you remain loyal to an outdated version of yourself, you will limit your future to the boundaries of your past. Carl Jung understood that the psyche is not static. It is dynamic, evolving, constantly seeking greater integration and wholeness through the process of individuation. But individuation requires transformation, and transformation requires the death of identities, not physical death but psychological death, the letting go of patterns, beliefs, and self-concepts that no longer serve your development. This is where many hesitate, because letting go feels like loss. Even when what you are releasing is limiting you, even when it is holding you back, there is comfort in familiarity, there is safety in repetition, even if that repetition leads to stagnation, so you remain where you are. Not because you cannot move forward, but because moving forward requires becoming someone unfamiliar, and unfamiliarity creates fear. This fear manifests as doubt, as hesitation, as the quiet voice that says, "This is not who you are." But that voice is not truth, it is memory. It is the echo of your past experiences, your previous behaviors, your established patterns. It is your current identity attempting to preserve itself. But growth demands that you challenge it, that you question whether the person you have been is aligned with the person you want to become, and if it is not, then you must be willing to outgrow it. This process is not comfortable. It requires self-confrontation. You must examine your habits, your reactions, your beliefs, and you must identify which of them are limiting you, which of them are keeping you small, which of them are preventing you from expanding into your potential. This requires honesty, because it is easy to justify your behavior, to rationalize your patterns, to defend your limitations. But honesty removes those defenses. It forces you to see yourself clearly, not as you wish to be, but as you are, and in that clarity you begin to see the gap between your current self and your potential self. This gap is not a source of shame. It is a source of direction. It shows you where growth is needed. But recognizing the gap is only the beginning, because awareness without action does not lead to transformation. You must act, and action requires change. You cannot continue to behave in the same way and expect to become someone different. This is the paradox of growth. You must become someone new before you fully feel like that person. You must act beyond your current identity. You must make decisions that your past self would not make. You must adopt behaviors that feel unfamiliar. This is what it means to outgrow yourself. It is not a single moment. It is a continuous process, a series of decisions where you choose growth over familiarity, expansion over comfort, development over stagnation. Each time you make such a choice, you weaken the hold of your old identity and strengthen the foundation of a new one. But this process is gradual, because identity is reinforced through repetition. The patterns you have established over time do not disappear instantly. They persist, they reappear, they attempt to pull you back into old behaviors. This is where discipline becomes essential. You must consistently act in alignment with the person you are becoming, not the person you have been. Even when it feels unnatural, even when it feels uncomfortable, even when it feels uncertain, because it is through repetition that new patterns are formed, and through those patterns, a new identity emerges. But there is another layer to this process. Outgrowing yourself does not only involve adopting new behaviors, it also involves integrating the parts of yourself that you have ignored or suppressed. Jung referred to this as the shadow, the aspects of your personality that you do not fully acknowledge. These may include weaknesses, fears, insecurities, but also untapped strengths, creativity, and potential. If you do not confront your shadow, it controls you unconsciously. It influences your behavior in ways you do not fully understand. It keeps you within the boundaries of your current identity. But when you face it, when you bring it into awareness, you gain access to energy that was previously inaccessible. You become more complete, more integrated, more capable of transformation. This is an essential part of outgrowing yourself, because you cannot transcend what you refuse to acknowledge. You must see yourself fully, both your strengths and your limitations, and you must accept that both are part of your development. But acceptance does not mean stagnation. It means understanding. It means recognizing where you are so that you can move forward intentionally, because growth is not random, it is directed. It requires purpose. You must define the direction in which you want to grow, the kind of person you want to become, the values you want to embody, the behaviors that reflect those values, and then you must align your actions with that vision. This alignment is what drives transformation. Without it, change is inconsistent. temporary, unstable, but with it, change becomes structured, sustained, progressive. However, this alignment requires letting go. You cannot hold on to old patterns while trying to adopt new ones. They conflict, they create internal tension, they prevent coherence. So you must release what no longer serves you, old habits, old beliefs, old narratives about who you are and what you are capable of. These narratives are particularly powerful because they shape your perception of yourself, they define your limits, they determine what you believe is possible. If you continue to tell yourself that you are not disciplined, not capable, not consistent, you will act accordingly. You will reinforce that identity. But if you challenge those narratives, if you replace them with new ones supported by action, you begin to shift your identity. You begin to see yourself differently, and this new perception influences your behavior, which further reinforces the new identity. This is the cycle of transformation. Action shapes identity, identity shapes action, and through this cycle you outgrow your previous self. But this process requires persistence, because there will be moments where the old identity feels stronger, where the familiar patterns re-emerge, where the discomfort of growth feels overwhelming. In those moments you must remember why you began. You must reconnect with your vision, with your purpose, with the understanding that growth requires discomfort, that expansion requires uncertainty, that transformation requires letting go, and you must continue, step by step, action by action, choice by choice, because outgrowing yourself is not a destination. It is a continuous process. There is always another level, another layer, another version of yourself that must be transcended. This does not mean you are never enough. It means you are always capable of more, and that capability carries responsibility. The responsibility to not remain where you are if you know you can grow, to not settle into comfort if it limits your potential, to not cling to identity if it restricts your development, because the greatest limitation is not external, it is internal. It is the version of yourself that you refuse to outgrow. But once you accept this, once you embrace the necessity of growth, something shifts. You begin to see change differently, not as a threat, but as an opportunity, not as loss, but as expansion, not as instability, but as evolution. And with this shift, you become more adaptable, more resilient, more capable of navigating uncertainty, because you are no longer defined by a fixed identity. You are defined by your ability to evolve. This is true strength, not rigid consistency but dynamic growth, the ability to let go of what you were and step into what you can become, again and again, until growth becomes your nature, until transformation becomes your pattern, until outgrowing yourself is no longer something you resist, but something you embrace, because you understand that who you are is not fixed, it is a process, and that process is yours to shape, through your actions, through your choices, through your willingness to release the past and move toward the future. This is the path of individuation, the path of becoming, and it requires one thing above all, the courage to outgrow yourself. There is a paradox at the center of human development that most people encounter but few fully understand. It appears contradictory at first glance, almost unreasonable to the unexamined mind. Discipline leads to freedom. To many, this seems inverted. Discipline is often associated with restriction, with limitation, with the removal of choice. It evokes images of rigid schedules, controlled behavior, denied impulses, and imposed structure. It feels like confinement, like the narrowing of life's possibilities. Freedom, on the other hand, is imagined as the absence of constraint. It is associated with spontaneity, with limitless choice, with the ability to act according to desire without interference. So how can one lead to the other? How can limitation create liberation? To understand this, one must look deeper not at the surface definitions, but at the underlying mechanics of the human psyche, because what most people call freedom is often not freedom at all. It is impulsivity. It is reactivity. It is the condition of being driven by immediate desires, fleeting emotions, and external stimuli without conscious direction. This kind of freedom feels pleasurable in the moment, but it lacks stability. It lacks direction. It lacks meaning, and over time it leads not to expansion but to fragmentation. When you act purely on impulse, you become subject to whatever arises within you or around you. Your behavior is dictated by mood. Your attention is captured by distraction. Your energy is dispersed across uncoordinated actions. You move, but without direction. You act, but without purpose. And this lack of structure creates internal chaos. You may feel free in isolated moments, but over time you begin to feel lost, because without direction, freedom becomes emptiness. Carl Jung understood that the psyche seeks order, not rigid control but meaningful structure. Without structure, the different elements of the self, desire, fear, ambition, comfort, pull in different directions. There is no integration, no alignment, no coherent movement toward a defined goal. This is the true cost of undisciplined freedom. It dissolves the unity of the self. It prevents the formation of a stable identity. It keeps you in a state of perpetual reaction rather than intentional creation. Discipline resolves this, not by suppressing freedom but by organizing it. Discipline is not the enemy of freedom, it is the condition that makes freedom possible, because true freedom is not the ability to do anything at any moment. It is the ability to do what matters, consistently, without being controlled by impulses that contradict your long-term development. It is the capacity to direct your own behavior, to act according to intention rather than compulsion, to move toward a chosen path rather than drift aimlessly. This requires control, not external control but self-control, and self-control is the essence of discipline. When you are disciplined, you are not eliminating choice, you are refining it. You are choosing which choices deserve your attention and which do not. You are prioritizing actions that align with your goals and values over those that provide only immediate gratification. This is where the paradox begins to resolve, because by limiting certain behaviors you expand your capacity in others. When you discipline your attention, you gain the freedom to focus deeply. When you discipline your time, you gain the freedom to accomplish meaningful work. When you discipline your habits, you gain the freedom to build consistency. And consistency leads to mastery. Mastery is one of the highest forms of freedom, because when you master a skill, you are no longer constrained by incompetence. You can express yourself fully within that domain. You can create, adapt, and perform with confidence. But mastery requires repetition. It requires structure. It requires discipline. Without discipline, effort is inconsistent, and inconsistent effort cannot produce mastery. This applies not only to skills, but to character. If you cannot control your impulses, you are not free. You are controlled. Controlled by desires that shift constantly. Controlled by emotions that fluctuate unpredictably. Controlled by external influences that capture your attention. This is not freedom, it is dependence. True freedom begins when you are no longer a slave to these forces, when you can feel an impulse and choose not to act on it, when you can experience discomfort and continue forward regardless, when you can delay gratification in service of something greater. This is internal sovereignty, the ability to govern yourself, and this sovereignty is built through discipline. But this process is not immediate. At first, discipline feels restrictive. It feels like effort, like resistance, because you are going against established patterns. You are challenging habits that have been reinforced over time. You are disrupting the comfort of familiarity. This creates friction, but this friction is temporary, because as you repeat disciplined actions, they become easier, more natural, more integrated. What once required effort becomes automatic. This is where discipline transforms. It is no longer experienced as force. It becomes structure, a framework that supports your behavior. And within that framework you experience a different kind of freedom. Not the chaotic freedom of impulse, but the stable freedom of direction. You know what you are doing. You know why you are doing it. You are not constantly deciding, debating, or delaying. You are moving, progress, can sing, building. This reduces internal conflict. It conserves energy, because decision-making is minimized. You do not waste time negotiating with yourself. You follow a system, and that system produces results. These results reinforce your behavior. They strengthen your identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who is disciplined, someone who follows through, someone who can be relied upon. And this self-perception further supports your actions. This is how discipline becomes identity. And when discipline becomes identity, freedom expands. Because you are no longer dependent on external motivation. You do not need to feel inspired to act. You act because it is who you are. This consistency creates stability, and stability creates opportunity. Because when your behavior is reliable, you can plan, you can build, you can pursue long-term goals with confidence. This is where discipline leads to true freedom. The freedom to create a life that is aligned with you, our values. The freedom to pursue meaningful goals without being derailed by distraction. The freedom to develop your potential fully. But there is another layer to this. Discipline does not only free you from internal chaos, It also frees you from external limitation, because when you are disciplined, you become competent, you develop skills, you produce results, you create value, and value creates opportunity. Opportunity expands your choices. You are no longer limited to what is immediately available. You can choose paths that were previously inaccessible. This is external freedom, but it is built on internal discipline. Without discipline, potential remains unrealized. You may have ability, intelligence, creativity, but without consistent effort, these qualities do not translate into results. And without results, your options remain limited. Discipline bridges this gap. It converts potential into performance, and performance into opportunity. This is why the most successful individuals are often highly disciplined, not because they enjoy restriction, but because they understand its function. They see discipline not as a burden, but as a tool, a mechanism for achieving freedom. They do not resist it. They use it. They structure their days. They control their attention. They manage their energy. They act consistently, and through this consistency they create outcomes that expand their freedom. This does not mean their lives are rigid. On the contrary, discipline often creates flexibility, because when your essential responsibilities are handled consistently, you have more space for creativity, exploration, and rest. Your time is not consumed by chaos. It is organized, and within that organization there is room to move. This is structured freedom, a balance between order and flexibility, between discipline and expression. This balance is essential, because too much rigidity can become restrictive, but too little structure leads to chaos. The goal is not absolute control, it is alignment, to create a system that supports your growth while allowing for adaptation. This requires awareness. You must observe your behavior, understand your patterns, identify where discipline is needed, and apply it intentionally, not as punishment but as guidance, because discipline at its core is an act of self-respect. It is the decision to act in your own best interest, even when it is difficult. It is the refusal to settle for immediate comfort at the expense of long-term fulfillment. It is the commitment to your own development, and this commitment is what creates freedom, because when you respect yourself enough to act with discipline, you build a life that reflects that respect. You create structure, you create consistency, you create progress, and through that progress you expand your possibilities. You are no longer confined by your limitations. You are no longer restricted by your impulses. You are no longer dependent on external circumstances. You are directing your own life. This is the ultimate freedom, not the absence of constraint, but the presence of control. Not the ability to do anything at any time, but the ability to do what matters, consistently, effectively, and intentionally. And that ability is built through discipline, day by day, action by action, choice by choice, until it becomes who you are, until freedom is no longer something you seek, but something you embody, because you have built the structure that makes it possible. So when you wake up, and your mind whispers, "Not today," that is the moment, that is the battlefield, that is where your future is decided, not in grand visions, not in perfect plans, but in the quiet decision to act, despite how you feel, because the truth is simple and brutal. If you follow your emotions, you will remain where you are. If you follow discipline, you will become who you were meant to be. And the day, AP within you, you already know this. Now the question is, will you act?